Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to our Mark Bible study. We're going to have a special guest visitor today. Well, we can look at him as a special guest visitor. Our normal visitor is Mark. And today we're going to have some Matthew also. We're looking at the story of Jesus and the Syro-Phoenician woman. Let me throw up the screen here so you can look at it. This occurs in Mark chapter 7. And also Matthew chapter 15. If you know anything about the Gospels, we have 4 Gospels in the New Testament of the Christian Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the Synoptic Gospels. You hear that word optic in there. It has to do with seeing. So when we look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we see lots of similarities. They look at the life of Jesus and tell the story of the life of Jesus from very similar perspectives. New Testament scholars have looked at them and said, okay, these guys, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were familiar with each other's writings. And depending on which scholar you read, you'll say that this one used this one or used this one. The most common perspective these days is that Mark was written first, and then Matthew and Luke used Mark and their own material. Now, one of the things we're going to see today as we have Mark and Matthew talking to each other, we're looking at them together, is we see differences in the way they handle the text. In some ways, Mark tells us more. In other ways, Matthew tells us more. So both of these authors, Mark and Matthew, are purposefully choosing what to say and what not to say. And behind their telling of the story, there is the actual events of the story. Jesus actually being in the area of Tyre, meeting with a woman from that region. So let's look at the map here. The map's a good place to start. If you're watching the video and not just listening to the audio, what I'm looking at here is a map of what we today call Israel. In the south, we have Judea. See Jerusalem, Bethlehem, places like that are down in the kingdom of Judea, which isn't a kingdom anymore. It's a Roman province. And we have Samaria. Jesus does things in Samaria occasionally. But Jesus grew up and did most of his ministry up here in Galilee, in what we would today call northern Israel. In today's story, Jesus has left Galilee and moved up to the region of Tyre. If you wanted to go to Tyre today, you would go to the country of Lebanon. We have Lebanon along the coast, and today we have the country of Syria that's over to the east. And Syria, there's a bit of Syria up to the north of Lebanon, but that's not on the map today. So Jesus is outside of the territory of what we think of as Israel. So most of the population around here are not Jews. Most of them are not worshipers of the God of Israel. So that's something to keep in the background. Let's turn to the text. Here we have Mark set alongside Matthew. One of the things we notice immediately, looking at it visually, is that Mark tells more of this first part than Matthew does. So here's what Mark says as he's starting out. Mark 7:24, Jesus left that place, the place he was before, and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syro-Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. Now here's Matthew's telling of that. Matthew 15, starting at verse 21. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." What commonalities do we see here? First commonality is obviously talking about Jesus transitioning from one place to another. He's been in ministry, he's been in the area of Galilee. Now he's moving to the north, to Tyre. It doesn't say here why he went up there, but the implication, especially in Mark, is that he went there to get away from the crowds. He's trying to have some time on his own, some time to maybe pray, maybe some time to plan, maybe it's just time to rest and recover. So he goes up to this region where people aren't actively looking for the Messiah, places where maybe they haven't heard about his teaching, about his miracles, so the crowds aren't seeking that out. They're not seeking the entertainment that comes from the Jesus show as they experience it. So here in Mark, we see that he enters a house and did not want anyone to know about it. Matthew didn't tell us anything about this aspect of Jesus wanting privacy, of wanting to be unknown. And yet, according to Mark here, we see that Jesus failed. He wanted to be left alone, but he could not keep his presence a secret. And Mark tells us, in fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. So Jesus practically gets no time alone. Well, we don't really know how much time because Mark and Matthew don't tell us. The idea, the picture here is that it's almost immediate. The news of Jesus, his fame, has preceded him. People all over the region, not just in Galilee, not just in Judea, not just in Israel, but throughout the region, have heard news about Jesus, and they're coming. And let's see how Jesus deals with this. What do we know about this woman? Well, here in Mark, we see her described as a Greek, born in Syro-Phoenicia. Now, sometimes in the Bible, when someone is called a Greek, that's pointing at their ethnicity, that this person is an ethnic Greek. They live in the area that we today call Greece. Other times, when someone is called a Greek, all that's pointing at is that they're not a Jew. They are a Gentile. So sometimes calling someone a Greek is a synonym for calling them a Gentile. What does Matthew call her? Matthew calls her a Canaanite woman. So the idea of calling someone a Canaanite goes back more to the Old Testament way of thinking. A Canaanite is again a Gentile, someone who is not a Jew, not a member of the people of Israel. But a Canaanite is a person who is descended from the inhabitants of the land before Israel moves in. So here's this woman who is not of the people of Israel, someone who is not distinguished by worshiping or believing in or giving her allegiance to the God of Israel. And yet here she is seeking Jesus. She has faith. She's demonstrating faith, belief in his abilities, trust that he can do something about it. She is expecting something from him. In Mark, we get a description of what she does. She comes to Jesus. We see who she is. And we see in verse 26, Mark 7, she begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. Matthew's rather different here. Matthew describes what she says. Matthew has her saying, Lord. Lord here is a term of respect. Sometimes Lord is a much larger confession than that. In this context, I think it's basically equivalent to what we would today call sir. Sir, son of David. Ooh, son of David. She's escalating here. This is not just a term of respect. This is recognizing Jesus's royal lineage here. She's recognizing, even though she is not of the people of Israel, that Jesus is the Messiah. I don't know what beliefs would have come with that for her, what baggage Messiah had for she who is a Canaanite woman, not a Jew, not an Israelite. But this is high praise coming from her to him. She's recognizing that he is somebody. He's not just a teacher, not just a miracle worker, but he is somebody who is coming with the authority of the God of Israel. He's the son of David. And she says, have mercy on me. It's not just have mercy on my daughter. It's have mercy on me, because the situation of her daughter being possessed by a demon is weighing on her so deeply. Her heart is broken for her daughter. She comes to Jesus for her daughter. She says, my daughter is demon possessed and suffering terribly. So one of the questions that occurs to me here is, what does it look like for a child to be demon possessed? How does a child become demon possessed? We might imagine that we adults might become demon possessed as we give ourselves over to sin, as we truck with Satan, as we offer him allegiance. But here's a little daughter who's suffering from demon possession. What does a child have to do to be demon possessed? And then also there's a follow-up question here. Is this something we need to be concerned about? We need to be concerned about children today, maybe even our children, being demonized. It seems to be a serious question. In my own experience, I'm not aware of knowing children that I would say, yep, that child was demon possessed or that child was demonized. So I'd say there are children definitely that need deliverance. Oftentimes that deliverance that's needed is because of things their parents have brought into their lives. I've heard of some children in our region who have been oppressed by what their parents have done. Heard of one family where dad is in prison, mom is a drug addict, and she gets to the point of not just abusing her children, but selling one of her daughters so that she can have money to support her drug habit. We can imagine children in that kind of situation being impacted by demons, demonized. It should break our heart to even imagine that children would be demonized. So we can easily understand where this woman is coming from. So here's this woman with a broken heart coming to Jesus, and we can easily imagine how Jesus, with what we know about Jesus, would respond to her, how he'd be compassionate, how he'd heal her immediately. But let's see what happens. What we read next is some explanation of the context here and how Jesus starts to respond. Mark has nothing here. Matthew gives us some material that's not in Mark at all. Matthew, starting in Matthew 15:23, says, Jesus did not answer a word. Now we can imagine Jesus would answer a word. Jesus would have compassion. Jesus would speak up and say, oh, I'm so sorry, woman. I'm so sad to hear that your daughter is suffering from this affliction. Let's do something about it. And Matthew says, Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. So the first surprising thing here is that Jesus is not answering a word. Jesus isn't saying anything. We'd expect him to say, oh, yes, woman, I have compassion on you. Or, oh, yes, woman, I understand how your heart would be broken over your little daughter being oppressed by a demon. But Jesus doesn't answer a word. Why doesn't he answer a word? I think it's because he's waiting to see how the disciples will respond. Now, this is the huge difference between Matthew and Mark. In Mark chapter 7, we see no indication that Jesus' disciples are there with him. All we see is Jesus himself has withdrawn to the area around Tyre. But in Matthew, we get the added detail that the disciples are with him. And how do the disciples respond? Have the disciples gotten the heart of Jesus? Have they learned to see people from God's point of view? Well, the disciples have an easy excuse because Jesus hadn't said anything. So they say, send her away. She's annoying us because she keeps crying out after us. Jesus, we were having a good teaching session. Here we are. We finally get away from the crowd. We're up here away from other Jews. We're away from other Israelites. Nobody's pestering you. Now this woman is pestering you. And Jesus, we were just getting into that good teaching. Come on, Jesus, send her away. Jesus now answers, and remember, this is in Matthew, not in Mark. Jesus answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. And I can imagine the disciples are saying, yes, Jesus, that's exactly what you've taught us. When you sent us out way back in Matthew chapter 10, well, they wouldn't say in Matthew chapter 10. They would point back to the events described back in Matthew chapter 10 when the disciples had been sent out by Jesus. We see that sending out both in Mark and Matthew. They're sent out to the lost sheep of Israel to speak to the Israelites, to Jews, to share the good news of Jesus, to bring healing, even to cast out demons, just what this woman was asking for. So when Jesus says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, the disciples are saying, yes, Jesus, you got that right. So woman, you get out of here. I think further, the disciples might be thinking that, yes, Jesus has a primary ministry of deliverance, a deliverance from demons. And yeah, that's entirely appropriate for his ministry among us Jews. But Gentiles, Canaanites, and they truck with demons all the time because they deserve it. So it's just a sign of their living apart from God, of their being non-Israelites, that they ought to be demon-possessed. So yeah, it's only right that Jesus is sent to the lost sheep of Israel. But we need to come up with some caveats here. If we look back at Mark chapter 5, we see Jesus coming to the region of, well, is it Gadara? Is it Gergesene? Where is it exactly that Jesus goes? But we're not really sure because there's different textual variants there. But Jesus goes to this place, and immediately this guy runs out of the tombs, this demon-possessed guy that has the legion of demons. And Jesus casts those demons out. The demons then take over a herd of pigs. They run off a cliff into the ocean, into the sea there, and they die. What do we know about that guy? Not a whole lot, except all the clues point to him being a Gentile. So we see there in Mark chapter 5, Jesus has delivered a Gentile from demon possession. And here's this guy, he's around the pigs, a sign of Gentile lifestyle. The pigs drown, and then the guy gets healed. He's cleansed, he's set free, he's delivered. Then he goes home to the Decapolis, Gentile cities, and tells about what Jesus has done for him. So the first caveat here is that Jesus has already demonstrated, not just to the public, but to his disciples, that even though he's sent to the lost sheep of Israel, that his ministry extends beyond them to Gentiles also. But there's a second caveat here. Jesus says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Okay, yeah, he's sent to Israel. But what's God's purpose for Israel? We go all the way back to the beginning of their calling in Genesis chapter 12. God calls Abraham, the father of the Jews, father of Israel, to go to the land he's going to show him. God says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you a great blessing, and all nations on earth be blessed through you. Guess who all those nations are? That's the Gentiles. So God's choosing of Israel, the fact that Israel is his chosen people, the chosen nation, is not for their own sake. They are chosen for the sake of the world, all peoples, including the Gentiles. So Jesus saying, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, is in no way him saying, woman, get out of here. I'm not here for you. So then we see Matthew saying, Matthew reporting what the woman says. Lord, help me. Give me help. So what happens next? Next, we get something very interesting. Mark chapter 7, verse 27 and 28. Jesus says, first, let the children eat all they want, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And we have Matthew's version of this. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Yes, it is, Lord, she said. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Okay, so in the first part here, we see Jesus's response. Jesus speaks up for the first time here in Mark, and this is his follow-up to his I'm only sent to the lost sheep of Israel line in Matthew. And he talks about the children and the children's bread, the children's food, and the dogs. Now, in our culture, we tend to think of dogs as cute, as cuddly, as part of the family, as man's best friend. In the ancient world, especially in this part of the world, dogs did not have that reputation. Dogs were dirty, dogs were nasty, dogs were scavengers. Don't mess with dogs. So to call somebody a dog was an insult. I've heard, maybe you've heard this too, of an ancient Israelite prayer where the Jewish man would stand up and pray, Lord, I thank you that I was not born a woman. Really glad I'm not a woman. A Gentile. Really glad I'm not a Gentile, or a dog. So all these categories come together in this woman. He's a Gentile, she's a woman. And now it sounds like Jesus is likening her to a dog. Not very complimentary, not at all what we would expect from Jesus. Jesus is nice, Jesus is compassionate. And yet it sounds to us like Jesus is giving her a hard and fast, resolute no on this occasion. But is he? Who is he talking to here? Is he directing this statement to the woman? To the disciples? Or is he just sort of throwing it out there? Is he expressing his own distaste for women, for Gentiles, for the dogs? I can imagine the disciples here saying, yeah, Jesus, you told her, you put her in her place. How often do we think that? How often do we develop categories of people who are worthy of our attention, worthy of our ministry, worthy of our service, worthy of our love? It's sometimes too easy for us to go with what we might imagine the disciples would do here. Yeah, we're spending time, guys, with those who are insiders, with our own. Maybe later we'll get on and be able to give you something. We learned that much from Jesus. But how's the woman respond? Does the woman say, okay, Jesus, I understand you are telling me no, and I've recognized you as Lord. I've recognized you as Son of David. So, yeah, I'm just going to have to take your word, your rejection, your saying no, as authoritative and go on my not so merry way. She does not take Jesus' no as the final word. What does she do? She comes up with a reply to exactly what Jesus had said. Lord, this is Mark's version. Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. So here are the children. Maybe the adults are saying, dogs, get out of here. But the kids love to play with the dogs, even the dirty dogs, even the scavenger dogs, even the nasty dogs. Kids are sort of that way. The dogs get the scraps that the children don't want to eat. Matthew's version is even stronger. Starts with yes. She affirms what Jesus had said. Yes, Lord. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. The woman is persistent. Why is she persistent? That's a key question here. I think she's persistent because her heart is broken for her daughter. She's not willing to give up. I wonder here, what conditions should we be persistent with Jesus? And what conditions should we take what appears to be a no from Jesus, but not accept it as a no? I think, again, that one of the key things here is having the broken heart. The woman's heart is broken for her daughter. And it's having that broken heart that keeps her persistent. It keeps her pursuing Jesus. We might think back in the Old Testament of the story of David. David and Bathsheba. David has sinned with Bathsheba. Sinned not only in raping her, not only in claiming her for himself, not only, but also in claiming her for himself and leading him to have her husband, Uriah the Hittite, killed. Uriah the Hittite, who was faithful to David. So as it happens, what forced him to have to kill Uriah was that Bathsheba came out pregnant by David. Now, after he takes her from Uriah, after he has Uriah murdered, the child is born. And part of God's judgment is the child's not going to live. The child's going to die. But as long as the child is alive, David is praying. David is seeking God. His heart is broken for the child. Later, when the child dies, David's people are afraid to bring him the news, afraid that he's going to go off the deep end. But David explains to them once he gets the news, as long as the child was alive, there's hope. So I prayed. It's what the woman's doing here. Her heart is broken for her daughter. So she's seeking the Lord. I've heard the story in my wife's family about her grandfather. Her grandfather was raised in church. Her grandfather was an active church person, active in leadership, but he wasn't a Christian. Maybe you've known someone like that, somebody who is a church person, but not a Christian person. His wife prayed for him all of her life, but then she died. It's only after she died that he became a Christian. And he wasn't just one of those, okay, yeah, I walked the aisle, I got my get out of hell free card. He became a hardcore Christian, leading Bible studies, teaching youth and children. And he was a great model of a Christian man after this real late life conversion. But it was an answer to prayer from his wife, whose heart was broken for him. Whose life is your heart broken for? Have you ever said, Lord, break my heart for somebody? It might be for your kids. It might be for a brother or sister. It might be for your parents. It might be for some other relative. It might be for a neighbor, for a friend. It might even be for an enemy. Maybe you are so mature in the Christian life that God has broken your heart for an enemy, somebody you don't like, somebody who's against you. But you're continually pursuing Jesus for that person. So what happens? Well, In Mark, we read, then he told her, for such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her daughter lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. So here's Jesus. Jesus doesn't hear her persistence and reject her. Jesus hears her persistence and affirms her persistence. Jesus likes her persistence. Jesus likes her response. So sometimes we respond to Jesus that way. We stay persistent. We stay engaged. Matthew's version adds in a word. Then Jesus said to her, woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. Her daughter was healed at that moment. Now, Mark demonstrates her faith. Mark tells the story of her faith, but he doesn't use that word faith. Matthew uses that word faith. You have demonstrated great faith. That faith is demonstrated in coming to Jesus in the first place, having expectations of him, and then it's also demonstrated being persistent with him, believing that Jesus is the answer to her need. Can we demonstrate that faith? And notice that the faith is not just arguing with Jesus, it's not just being persistent. But in Mark, we see that faith demonstrated is in that when Jesus says this, go, the demon has left your daughter. She goes. She takes him at his word. She doesn't say, okay, Jesus, but do you have any signs for me? Are you going to come with me? Are you going to touch her? Are you going to lay hands on her? Are you going to do some incantations? Are you going to pray for her? No, she has great faith. She just goes. And when she gets home, she finds her daughter delivered, finds her daughter healed. One of the things that occurs to me, and we'll look at this more in the next pericope, the next story in Mark, in our next Bible study. But notice how Jesus heals this daughter. It's only by word. It's only by saying it. Yeah, your daughter's healed. Your daughter's delivered. The demon is gone. Isn't always how Jesus does it. Sometimes we see Jesus casting out demons by saying, demon, be gone. So Jesus doesn't use the same healing or deliverance method every time. But each time Jesus demonstrates the authority. So how are you doing in relation to this story? What can you learn? What can we learn? What can we learn about putting our faith in Jesus? How can we emulate this woman's faith? I'd also ask another question. How can we emulate Jesus's response? How can we emulate Jesus's response in being willing, ultimately willing to be interrupted, even when we're doing something important, like getting time alone, teaching our disciples? Are we willing to be interrupted? Is there questions for us today? Well, let's pray as we close out today. Father, I thank you for this story of Jesus. I thank you how he stimulated faith in this woman. How he brought it out of her. Lord, today, stimulate that kind of faith in us. The faith that comes to you with our needs. The faith that comes to you with a broken heart. Lord, even today, break our heart for people around us. Help us to see them as you see them. And then to bring them before you, trusting you, to bring them deliverance, to bring them healing, to bring them hope. Amen. Well, thanks so much for joining us for Bible study today. See you next time.